Hi, my name is Ashley Harris, and I would like to welcome you to the Spring Home Builders Retreat. We would typically be enjoying ourselves right now on the coast and Gulf Shores. However, I'm coming to you from Hot Springs, Arkansas. I live here with my husband Jason and our two boys. Ty is our oldest. He is 14 and is wrapping up his freshman year in high school. And our youngest, Beckett, is 5. He is going to be kindergarten bound in the fall. I graduated college with a bachelor's degree in computer information systems and a minor in criminal justice. My networking experience started at a sheriff's office that I worked at for 7 years. I managed their public network for the first time, and it taught me over and over again that no matter what you implement to block or restrict access, someone who desperately wants around it will eventually find a way. Having learned that, I will be very candid with you, and I will tell you that I can't give you a surefire way to set it and forget it. It is a fight, just like our theme for the retreat. Satan is fighting for the hearts of us and our children. We must fight back. The sooner we take action and the more persistently we fight, the better our chances of success. Now, we have quite a bit of content to cover in how to protect our families, but before we get there, I do want to remind you there are handouts for this class available at the Home Builders website. You can go to www.homebuildersministry.org and download them from the virtual spring retreat page. I also want to spend a minute on why we protect our home network and our individual devices. Sometimes this is one of those subjects that people can be pretty divided on. We're attempting to protect our families from real threats, though. There are things like bullying, sexting, unwanted contact with predators or strangers. Image-based abuse is a big issue too that our children face. And what this is, it's when there are harmful images of a person that are circulated around without their consent. And it doesn't have to just be actual photos. It can be depictions. It can be drawings. I even read a story recently of image-based abuse where it was screenshots of text messages that were sent around and shared. And unfortunately, in this situation, the abuse resulted in a young man taking his life. We're also trying to be mindful of things like social networking, where it may not be dangerous in and of itself. The kids do need to be reminded that when they share things online, you may be sharing them with people you don't know or trust. Once there's a message or a photo or a video that's been shared, you also won't be able to control where it goes either. There are other online issues such as balancing their time online or on their devices, protecting your digital reputation. We didn't grow up having to worry that a post on a website could ruin our reputation or cost us a job. But we very quickly entered into that world, and our kids are going to have to face this problem on a much larger scale. So we need to talk to them now about protecting their digital reputation so that it doesn't cost them friendships or relationships or even job prospects. Online gaming is another issue too, not just for the time they spend gaming or the opportunity to connect with, again, strangers, but it also affects their social life and even their personality too. And it's always important to remind our kids that their personal information should be kept private, especially online. Last names, school names, addresses, basically any identifiable information should not be shared with people they don't actually know or trust. When I worked for the sheriff's office 10 years ago, it was astoundingly easy to take small details from a chat conversation and discover a lot of information about a person. And especially now with more technology and more information available online, you can pull somebody's Facebook post, and even if it's connected to a private profile, you can a lot of times narrow down a geographical location, where they work, their work address, Looking at public records, you can usually pull their home address, their mailing address, what vehicles they pay taxes on, who their home's mortgaged with. There's just a lot of information that you can get into, and that's not even going into public court documents either. So we want to be mindful of that with all the information that there is available. If somebody wants to find us, they can. So we don't want to make it easier for them to do this. And we need to make sure our kids are mindful and aware of this too. The younger you can start getting them to think of that, the more prepared they'll be as an adult too. But above all, the major concern that parents want to protect their kids from is what they might find or what might find them on the internet. Even young children can stumble on inappropriate content without trying. YouTube's autoplay feature makes it easy for kids to watch video after video after video. And sometimes those subsequent videos may have content that the child and the parent, neither one, intended to be viewed. If your child is likely or is prone to actively seek out inappropriate material, that's going to make your job of protecting them even more difficult, but all the more critical. And all that takes me to a saying that my youth pastor pressed into us over and over again when I was a teen. And it's a saying that I now pass on to my kids. I want them thinking about it and consciously connecting those dots. That saying is, sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. My youth pastor taught us that unguarded thoughts could lead us down a path that we would otherwise not choose for ourselves. And as parents, we need to recognize that unguarded devices could have the same effect on ourselves and our spouses, but especially our children. So the whole point of this class is to give you some practical ways to secure your network and your family from the big and the bad of the internet. Even with a degree and experience in doing this kind of stuff, when I sat down and considered what I wanted to do to protect our boys versus what I was already doing, or what I knew how to do, it was very overwhelming. It's hard to narrow down where to even begin, which was also pretty daunting when I went to prepare this class. There's just a lot to cover, and to try to cover it without the time luxury of being able to demonstrate some of the aspects of it was a struggle for me. Because of that, in your handouts, there are some supplementary notes and links that will have additional instruction or information. But the main topics that I felt we needed to hit on were rules in communication, passwords, this will make sense in a minute, network, devices, and software. Rules in communication is our first topic. And while I think it could be really easy to skip over or downplay this area, I've learned from experience this has probably been one of the more important things that we've done in setting boundaries and expectations for how devices will be used in our family. When our oldest received his first device, we discussed with him at that time what would be allowed and what would not be allowed. I let him know I monitor our network, and I'm going to have ways to check his device and see how it's being used, and I was going to make sure that he was holding himself to the standards that I expected him to. He became a believer very early on when I received my weekly email from Microsoft Family, which we'll discuss in a little bit. It showed some questionable search phrases that had popped up, so we had to sit down to discuss them. Mortification seems to be a good way to drive a point home with this kiddo, so I suggested to him, if you really want to learn more about this topic, we can find a suitable scientific website together, and mom and dad can use it to provide that science or anatomy lesson he had been curious about. He did not take me up on my offer. I will also add I would not recommend this for every kid. However, he has been a lot more mindful about his search terms since then. I've also never hidden from him the fact that I will regularly check his device to see what apps he has on it, what kind of messages he's sending and receiving, and also what kind of pictures he's been taking. He knows that I have ways of knowing if he deletes messages or photos in an attempt to hide them from me, and I have called him out on it. We've got a very clear rule that messages are not to be deleted. If you have to delete them, you shouldn't be sending them in the first place. And that applies to us too as adults. So some of the topics I would strongly recommend creating rules for and communicating with your child on, first for us, is ownership of the device. In our household, we own the device. Even after he broke several and had to pay for his replacement out of his own pocket, we have ultimate say over when and how he gets to use it because we're paying for the continued service to the phone. Legal liability is another reason that we own the phone. We are legally liable for his phone and the things that he may do while using it. This is another important conversation to have with our kids as they go into the teen years, because they need to know that not only might they face legal ramifications for their actions, but their parents can be found liable as well, and it can sometimes have tremendous consequences to a family. As your kid gets older, you'll need to discuss the legal implications of their communications too, both in the context of cyberbullying, but also in the images that they may be tempted to send or receive and the consequences that could result. Reputation being one of those. Reputation is a very fragile thing, and these are good ways to compromise it quickly. Expectation of privacy is the next one. In our home, we have the rule there's no expectation of privacy. However, we do our best to grant privacy as a privilege earned based on trust. So if you want more privacy than you're getting, just show us you deserve more privacy. But if you show us that you don't deserve the privacy you have been given, we'll adjust that accordingly. Parental controls. We have used parental controls and we don't hide that. It's on our network, but it's also on each device that comes into our home. It's always been the rule when somebody gets a new device or gaming system, the parent is the one to set it up. And so it's a little bit of a headache to the parent that it falls on, but it saves a lot of trouble and it allows us to put some of the restrictions in place that we'll discuss later on. Screen time. This is something we do better with our oldest than we did with our youngest. Because we didn't set time limits up front with our youngest, his screen time went from a little bit here and there to this fun little phase where he threw a fit to take a bath or get dressed because it meant his device wouldn't be in his hands. So take my advice, set those screen limits from the start if you can. It's easier to allow them more time as they get older than it is to suddenly dial it back. I'll also tell you, the less that our kids have the devices in front of them, the more pleasant they are to be around. In fact, a couple of years ago, my oldest sent me a link that was stating that psychological science now says screen time has little impact on a kid's well-being, and Mom replied back to him that our own evidence indicates that it does, however, have a direct effect on their temperament. So we still have screen time. Apps and downloads. This is something you'll want to decide on whether you want to allow the kids the ability to download apps onto their devices, or if you want a parent to be the one to take care of all the app downloads. Apple and Android both have rating limits that you can set, and so they'll only show appropriate content to your kids, and so that allows them a little bit of liberty to find new games or apps that they want to install on their device. But parents need to understand some things may slip through those ratings. It can be a hairy monster either way. If you allow them the ability to install their own apps, you just have to understand that maintenance will come with it, because they tend to download anything and everything they might want, which is going to slow down the device and it'll cause errors, and existing apps need to update and they don't have space to do so. But also, if you choose to limit the installations to parent or adult only, you've got to prepare yourself for all the requests that come with it. Even without that ability to browse for the apps, they seem to find a lot that they want to have installed. So every time their friend gets a new game, they'll want a new game too. Appropriate content. Most of the time, we think of this conversation in terms of what our kids are viewing, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And this is by far one of the most important parts of the conversation. But it's especially important to remember that part of this talk includes content that is sent to or shown to them. This is something they need to prepare for and that we need to prepare for. It's no longer if this happens, but it's far more likely it's just a matter of time of when it happens. So we need to prepare our kids with how to respond to the temptations they will face. It's also a great time to discuss with them the concept of setting guardrails around certain areas of their life to protect them from compromising their values or their reputation. And another major topic that we don't think we need to discuss until we realize we should have is online etiquette and interaction. I would encourage you to be proactive in this area. We like to think that our kids won't act any differently on the phone that we will be watching than they will in front of us or as we are actively watching. But we all know how easy it is to feel anonymous behind a screen. We may not be unkind or ugly, but when you're behind that screen, sometimes it's easier to be a little less kind than we would be to somebody's face. Our kids are no different. In these group chats, they like to get into with their peers. A simple disagreement between two friends can very quickly evolve into something much more severe, and things get carried away. We've seen this twice now for ourselves with our oldest and his friends. Depending on your kiddo, there may be other rules you need to include. If they're younger, you may not need to discuss them all, but it is important that as they earn new privileges and more access to the digital world, you continue to have these conversations with them as you go. And keep in mind, they don't listen the first time when you tell them something. You're going to have to repeat yourself. You're going to have to take away privileges in order to drive your point home. But it's important to have these conversations and to let them know that you mean it. Now, moving on to passwords. This seems like an odd and awkward category to discuss, but it is crucial. It's an important part of any kind of internet security. There are going to be passwords that you share with your kids and those that you use in protecting your kids. And they've got to be kept separate. So it only made sense to cover this topic up front so that you don't have to come back later and change your game plan. We all know what a pain it is to keep track of our endless list of passwords. Gone are the days where you have one password for everything, or it should be. Now we need secure passwords, but they also need to be passwords we can remember. There's the old trick of keeping a notebook or a notepad file that contains every username and password for every account we have. I had a boss that did this, and so if we ever needed to know how to get into one of the accounts, we just went to his little book on his desk. And so that's obviously a security flaw. What happens when you lose it, or just like us, someone else gets their hands on it? Some people use a different password for everything, and instead of logging it into a notebook, they use a secure application to track those passwords. If the software is encrypted and their identity is verified with each login, this is one of the more secure options. It tends to be lesser used, though. It usually means more passwords to remember, more time logging in if you have to consult an application with each sign-on. So my personal system involves using a handful of different secure passwords, but dividing them out into categories. It means fewer passwords to remember, but having them divided into categories helps protect other accounts too. So if one password is compromised, then hopefully all of the others are not. I do cheat a bit and keep an encrypted file on my phone that contains those passwords. So technically, if someone got my phone, they could get to my passwords, but if they got my phone, they're logged into everything I have anyway. So in that event, a remote data wipe would be my best course of action, as well as changing all of my passwords. I'm not going to recommend that everyone use my method, especially if you've got something secure that you're using that works well for you. But I will elaborate a little bit more just in case you want to use it or in case you want to modify it for your own purposes. I've got 5 tiers. It's inevitable that you're going to occasionally reuse a password, so I have mine structured according to what kind of account it is. And then I have 1 password, or occasionally 2 or 3 for each category. The first category is your email account. This is your social security number of passwords. It shouldn't get used anywhere else because this 1 password could potentially give someone access to every single other password you have, or the ability to reset the password for any other account. This password should be one of the more secure ones you have: uppercase, lowercase, special characters, numbers, just to maximize security. On this password especially, I just use a random string of characters, no words, no phrases. You want this one to be your most protected password. Next are social media accounts. These can be another gold mine for hackers because if you unlock somebody's social media account, you can potentially unlock a horde of other accounts that are connected to it. So for this reason, I use a separate password for my social media accounts than I do for other kinds of accounts. Being realistic though, not everyone wants to have a separate one for Facebook and a separate one for Instagram and another one for Twitter. You may just want 1 password for the entire category, but it does mean that if one were to be compromised, you need to treat them as if they all were and update the password for each account. Next up are accounts with financial or payment information. These are accounts that are tied to or may contain financial information such as bank logins, bill or utility logins, shopping sites where my payment information is saved or stored. On these, I just use a secure password that's different from the other 2 categories. This adds that extra layer of protection between our email account and our money. So if one is compromised, we don't necessarily have to worry that the other one automatically is. But because my husband and I both need to be able to access these kinds of accounts, we have a couple of shared passwords that we use for these. Additionally, this would be the category I would lump those parental control passwords into. They're not something I would share with my kids, but it no doubt needs to be a password that my husband can easily remember for his own access to. Next is a general category called accounts I had to create but don't want. This is where I embrace 1 password for everything. These are for accounts that don't have financial information, don't have any significant meaning, but I was forced to create a login. And then lastly, there is accounts that I share with my kids. Obviously, I don't want to give my kids a password that I use for more important logins, nor do I want to share with them my email or social media logins. But as they get older, they're going to want a little more freedom with the internet and their devices, so there are going to be certain passwords we'll wind up sharing with them. The Wi-Fi password, TV provider logins, shared family apps. At some point, they're going to ask for these passwords, so it's a good idea to have a password you can share with them that won't be one used for other more confidential accounts. And it's a good idea to communicate these concepts with your kids too. They may currently live in the world of 1 password, but it's not where they need to remain, and so it's smart to teach them that before they learn the hard way. Moving on to networks now, our home networks are one of the things we stress the most about protecting, and they should be. While I certainly don't condone taking scripture out of context, that's exactly what I'm going to do here with Proverbs 4:23, which says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Your network is your heart of your digital home, which is why this part of the class is so crucial. Everything we do flows out of this one central point. Unfortunately, many times they don't get protected at all because it feels like it's bigger and more complicated than it has to be. Where do you begin? How do you do it? Is my equipment enough? Do I need something more? There are a lot of questions and it makes it feel overwhelming. So I don't want you to let this get to you. We'll start with the basics. There are typically one or two main components in your home network. Your modem is the device that receives the internet connection from your service provider, and it translates it so that your devices can connect using its signal. Your router is the device that takes that translated connection from your modem and it broadcasts it out so that multiple devices can connect to it. In some instances, a modem can act as both components. And this is the main point through which the internet and everything that comes with it enters and exits your home. So because of this is the most crucial place to enable filters. There are several different ways you can add filters to your network. Setting them up is a lot easier than you really would expect it to be. If you've bought a new router in recent years, it's probable that it already has capabilities pre-installed into it and they just need to be turned on. There are add-on components that can connect to your network, or you can simply change settings in your modem or your router so that your network traffic goes through domain name services or DNS servers that filter the content before your family views it. And this last option is often the most affordable option as they're typically free or very low cost to the user. So without trying to speak above everyone, the simplest way to explain a DNS setting is to describe them as phone numbers that our computers use to call other computers. So when you submit a web page or a search result, your computer calls a root server using that default DNS number. The server, which acts more like a switchboard, sends a request onto another server that provides the website or search result that you ask for. In order to filter what comes across our network, we want to change that setting so that the initial call is made to a computer or an operator that knows what is allowed or not allowed on our network. And then when they receive that call, they screen it to make sure that what comes back doesn't violate the parameters you've established. So ideally, if your children try to search for something or accidentally clicks on something that you don't want them to see, this is what happens. Or for everything else, it will appear to proceed through your network just as it always has. There are several reputable services of this kind that you can explore and decide for yourself which is best for you. In your handout, there's a list of some of the popular DNS filtering sites. I personally have used OpenDNS on networks that I've managed for more than 15 years now. It's been a site that I can trust when I'm referring friends or family. It's also the site that I used at the sheriff's office and the jail when I worked there too. It's evolved really well, and it's been a good option for households that do want to set it and forget it, as well as those who want to change the settings and make adjustments over time as their family changes and needs more or less restrictions. On each of the sites listed, though, you should be able to log in and view any blocked content that would otherwise have made it to your family's eyes. Typically, updating your DNS servers is going to take 5 minutes or less. I'll also add, too, there are certain internet service providers, AT&T Uverse, I believe, is one. They disable this ability to change the settings on their hardware. So if you find that this is a case for you, I would check with them, check their support pages maybe, see if there's a workaround for it, and if not, I would connect with your internet service provider and see what alternative options they have. They may provide something that has a similar ability, and so it may be included and you just weren't previously aware of it. Ideally, this would be where I would step you through how to do this. However, it seems to be that's also where I lose people as the instructions vary depending on the brand of modem or router you use. So for time's sake and to avoid confusion, I've included a link in your handouts so you can look up and it'll instruct you on changing the settings on your hardware. You'll just look for the brand of device that you have, and they've got very clear instructions, very great support too. So if you run into any issues, you can contact them. Now, once I do have the DNS settings changed on my network, I then go to the OpenDNS website or whatever site you prefer, and I make sure that the settings there are filtering the things that I want it to filter. Most sites will let you blacklist sites that aren't automatically filtered. You can add sites to a safe list if they are being filtered but you don't want them to, or you can also adjust your filter levels to include or exclude certain categories. Here you can see I'm using OpenDNS. I've chosen moderate filtering for our home, which filters out 15 different categories. You can also create custom settings where you get to choose the categories you want to allow or disallow. They also have a customization section where you can select your own graphic for the messages that will display on the pages that are blocked by the filter. Now, keep in mind, these settings only affect your devices when they're connected to your home network. So when your kid takes the devices to a friend's house or when they're connected with cellular data, those restrictions don't follow the device. But OpenDNS does have instructions for adding those settings to the device too. So we'll get into that with the next section. Another method to protect your network is by attaching add-on components to it. These devices allow you to filter your network content, but they also give additional controls. You can set time limits, app restrictions, pause internet usage for specific devices or for the whole network. So if it's supper time, you can pause everybody's Wi-Fi access, or if one kid gets in trouble, you can pause their specific devices. If you have an internet service provider that doesn't allow you to change your DNS settings, like AT&T, using a device like this is a good option that's definitely worth considering. I'm seeing a lot more devices like this coming on the market too. There are two that I've consistently read positive reviews on. Disney Circle is the option that I recommended to my sister a couple years ago. She loves it, loves the control it gives her. KoalaSafe has a similar device too. Circle, that device typically sells for about $100. I have seen it as low as $39 on Amazon during special sales and promotions. There are links in your handouts for both devices, and so if you want to find out more, you can check those sites out. I would always encourage you to spend some time doing searches and comparing to other devices. There are new products coming out each day. But be sure to read the reviews. There are going to be reviews from tech-savvy individuals as well as people with a very basic level of computer skill. But they'll also share with you any issues they ran into and what you may want to be aware of. Again, these add-on components also will only protect your devices when they're connected to your wireless network. Many of the modems and routers on the market today come pre-installed with software that allows you to set parental controls or filters right in that device. They have software for your computer or apps for your phone that make it easy to adjust the filters, set the time limits, even turn on and off internet access either at the device level or occasionally at an individual level. Some even come with OpenDNS and Disney Circle built right into them. So that makes those integrations even easier, and then you don't have to buy the additional components unless they're needed elsewhere. We replaced our modem and our router a little more than a year ago, and me being me, I did weeks of research and I debated on what I wanted. Did I want an all-in-one device like I previously had where it was modem and router together? Or did I want a separate router with a few more advantages? So if you happen to be thinking it may be time to replace or upgrade your router, I've got 5 devices that were my top picks. The Netgear Nighthawk is what I ultimately went with. They've got several versions of this. Many come with Disney Circle or OpenDNS pre-installed. This one also boosts our wireless signal too, so it gives us better coverage throughout our home. Recently had this one recommended by a guy that was doing network installations at our office too. We were looking at other options there, and the Nighthawk was one that he specifically pointed out. Google Wi-Fi is another one that I've had tech support suggest too as a good option. It was my backup choice. It's a great option for smart home enthusiasts, but it's very simple, very easy to install for the average user. I recently helped a good friend install this in her home too, and I'll actually go a little bit into that in a benefit I uncovered with this one as well. Netgear Orbi and Linksys Velop. I have no idea if I'm saying that right or not. But all three of these devices come with multiple components so that you can extend your network signal using a mesh network system that shares signals between those points. They've also got great filtering and parental control settings. And then the last one, but still worth putting on this list, was Griffin. It was a strong contender. You can also create a mesh network with this device as well. You just have to purchase multiple units. The parental controls look really easy to set and control too. Before I move on, I'll quickly explain what a mesh network is and how they work. I kind of anticipate we might see more of these in the future. With the traditional setup of a router like we have in our home, you're going to have one Wi-Fi point and it broadcasts signal throughout the home. So for larger homes or rooms that are separated from the router with multiple walls or plumbing or electrical components, there are going to be areas of the home where you may have dead zones. And so mesh networks help with this. So say, for instance, this is your home network with your router in a central area. If your computer is here and your child's gaming system is here, they both should have a good network reception. But you may notice your mobile devices might disconnect from your Wi-Fi if you walk into a room that's just outside of that router's reach. With a mesh network, you can add another component that picks up that wireless network and then rebroadcasts it. So adding components here and here could strengthen performance and reliability of your network throughout your home. Again, before making a decision, I would encourage you to do your own research. What was best for our family may be too much or too little for yours. There could be other options that are new to the market too. Those may do exactly what you want. So again, I would just research and decide based on your own family's needs what best suits you. From here, we'll move on to devices. One of the most important things you can do to protect your network and protect your kids is by setting up every single device they get before they get to receive it. As I said earlier, it's tedious, it's time consuming, it is not fun to be that parent. But it's very crucial. In the age of the smart home, there is connected technology everywhere. I recently went to buy a new filter for our air conditioner and discovered there are now smart air conditioner filters. It has its own app, it monitors the air quality, and it tells you when it's time to change your filter. I also saw one of the popular diaper brands is launching a diaper that allows parents to monitor the status of their child's diaper through a smartphone or app. I'm not going to go into all these devices, so today we're just going to focus on the most common ones that our kids are going to be using and interacting with. Those are computers, phones and tablets, gaming consoles, and smart TVs. Cell phones and video games are probably the most frequently used devices our kids get their hands on, but computers are the easiest way to access some of the darker parts of the internet. So before I give a kid their first computer, or before I add their account to the family computer, it's important to cut that access off as much as possible. One blanket rule I would advise for any device is that whenever and wherever possible, the admin account for those devices should be a parent's account, never the child's account. The child's account should only be a user account. Doing this limits them from changing settings. When preparing a computer for the kids' use, I always make sure to set it up by creating or logging them into their own account. but it's got to be one that's linked to a family account. For our Windows-based computers, that means they have their own Microsoft account, and it's connected to our Microsoft family account. I'll discuss the whys of this in the next section on software. Giving them their own account gives them a sense of privacy in their devices, but it also keeps stuff separate from your own, and keeps you from having to share a PIN number and password that you're going to be using for parental controls. It also makes it easier for reporting, and it indicates directly to you what activity belongs to which user. And okay, from there, I get the computer updated and connected to the network, and then I disable guest accounts. This means they can only log into Windows with the account that I established on the computer for them. There's some handouts on there's some instructions on your handout for how to do this. I would also point out too, if they have a school device, it is important to have that conversation with the school if necessary, because those guest accounts can not only get around your settings, they can get around the school settings too. So be aware of that and be mindful of that too. After this, I changed the DNS servers. Our home network is not the only place our kids are going to use those devices, so I do want the DNS settings to follow them wherever they take those. As before, there's a link in your handout that gives you the step-by-step instructions. If their computer has an Ethernet adapter, which is the one that looks like a giant phone cord, as well as a wireless adapter, you're going to need to change the settings for both of those. I've made a note of that in the handouts too to remind you. And then after that, I download Google Chrome. And I'll get a little more into the why of this in the software section, but I set Google Chrome as the default browser, and then I log into Chrome using the child's Google account. And then lastly, Windows PCs, MacBooks, Chromebooks, all of them come with parental control options built into the computer. So it's very important to take a stroll through those settings and make sure you've got those features both enabled and adjusted to your family's preferences. As parents, we probably worry more about the settings on our child's phone, which is the next section. That's the device that's in their hand most often, and it's the device that they're going to take more places with them. It's their number one communication device, which makes protecting this one even more crucial. But there are major differences between Apple, Android, and Windows platforms that make setting these up a little different. First and foremost, I do sign in with an account of their own that is also linked to a family circle. As I mentioned, Microsoft, Google, and Apple all have family accounts. After that, I head over to opendns.com and I find the appropriate way to configure the DNS servers on their devices. There are instructions for iOS 10, iOS 11, Android, Kindle Fire devices. That link's also included in your handouts too. Again, it protects your child's device even when it's not connected to your home Wi-Fi. So important because kids don't just it doesn't take them long to figure out that if they can't access it on Wi-Fi, they can just turn Wi-Fi off and access it on their cellular connection. So having this setting on the device itself prevents that little workaround. Then I download Google Chrome, as I did on the computer. I sign into it with a child's Google account. Don't forget to set this as their default browser so that all links are opened with it. From there, I want to take the time to go through their device before I hand it over to them. Go through their settings thoroughly. Make the adjustments that you feel best suit their child and your desires for protecting them. They're always going to explore every aspect of their phone, so you need to know also what it's capable of. You need to know if there are settings that you expect them to maintain as part of the agreement you have with them in having a phone. And then lastly, after this, I install any apps and software that I've elected to use for monitoring or parental control. I'm also going to discuss this with my kid, and I'm going to tell them the settings that I expect for them to leave alone and the consequences for if they disobey. moving on to gaming consoles. Now, before online gaming came along, we really didn't have to worry about parental controls on these because as long as we just kept it in the rating we were comfortable with, it was golden. Now we have to worry about the ratings and the chat and the communication and the purchases and so much more. So, with every new gaming system that comes into our home, and for some reason we have a ridiculous amount of them, I treat them just like I do any other digital device. I'm going to log in with a family linked account. I'm going to change the DNS servers. There are OpenDNS instructions for this with all of our consoles except the Nintendo Switch. It doesn't have web browsing, but it can still be used for watching videos, YouTube, Hulu, all that. However, Nintendo Switch does have their own parental control app, so you're not completely without ability to protect them there. And then after doing that, again, I go through those settings, enable the manufacturer's parental controls, set them up the way you want. Those controls are going to vary depending on each system. This is also where Google search and product support pages come in handy. Most of the time it just takes a quick search. You can find immediate instructions for any of the changes you want. Microsoft Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo devices, they all typically have settings that allow you to control screen time, purchases, privacy, internet access, content restrictions, web filters. For setting up the DNS servers, the link's included in your handout there as well, so you can find that for all of the popular gaming systems too. The last one, smart TVs. I forgot about this the first time I did this class, and immediately afterwards I was like, we have smart TVs in every room of our home. If the TV itself isn't smart, the little box we connect to it is. So whether it's an app-enabled TV, there's an add-on component like Fire TV, Roku, Apple TV, or other devices, Chromecast. The internet's now gotten into our TVs too. And, you know, I know we tend to think this is one more way that the devil can get a foothold, but we also have an ability that our parents don't have. We can block this mess before it ever makes it into our home. Some smart TVs, I know Apple TV for sure, has the ability to support OpenDNS or the alternate DNS servers. Since it's still an emerging trend, it's not made it into all of the different TVs and platforms. So there may not be support documentation for every TV or device. But I would definitely begin there. I would go to OpenDNS or whatever service you've elected to use. Use your search feature to see if they have documentation for your particular device. You can consult your product manual in case there are instructions there. If all else fails, just go through the TV or device network settings and see if you can locate those DNS servers yourself. While you're in there, though, be sure to enable and set up parental controls. This is the good thing about smart TVs and all the streaming services. Every single device and service has this feature. In 2000, there was a federal law that required all TVs larger than 13 inches have to have a V chip. And what that does is it helps to filter violent TV programming. So to enable your parental controls, you can go to your device's menu and into those settings, and from there you can select the categories that the V-chip filters. It's also important to realize you may need to set your parental controls and your audience preferences from within the apps and streaming services you use to. I'm going to apologize for the wiggle of the camera here. I'm trying to hold it steady. On these parental controls, you're usually asked to set a PIN that's 4 or 5 digits in case you want to watch something other than a PG movie. Make sure it's not something your kids are going to know or guess, as it's also going to prevent them from renting or purchasing movies or pay-per-view events that sometimes come at a pretty steep price. I'll give a shout out here to my brother and sister-in-law. They just this week received a surprise $300 cable bill thanks to my niece's Disney pay-per-view shopping spree. Again, one of the most important things we need to remember is communication with our kids. It's not the job of technology to be aware of the media our families are consuming. Um, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends talking to your kids about what is appropriate and what is not. If this is a concern for your child's physical and mental health, imagine the effect it will have on their spiritual health as well. Changing these settings can help avoid accidental exposure to violence or sex, but communicating with your kids can go further towards keeping the clean screens in front of our family. It again gives us another opportunity to emphasize guardrails and accountability too. One of the young men that previously worked with our student ministry at church still used a flip phone while all the students were upgrading to, it was probably iPhone 6 or iPhone 7 back at this time. He took a lot of flack, and of course, the students all picked on him because of his dinosaur of a phone. Um, Many of them hadn't even used multitap to send text messages. Hadn't happened for probably as long as some of those students have been alive. What they didn't initially realize was that he had struggled with porn addiction for years. And he recognized he didn't need that temptation and the accessibility of how easy it was to view that content anytime or anywhere. And so he did discuss it with them. He gave his testimony, and once he told them why he made that choice to use that phone, and once they realized his motive and the lengths that he was taking to distance himself from that sin and that struggle, it became something they spoke of with a reverence and a respect. So again, it just gives you a good opportunity to talk about guardrails and to talk about accountability, and not just others holding you accountable, but you holding yourself accountable too. In this final section, we're going to look at types of apps or software we can use to help limit or monitor our kids' usage on their devices. There are a lot of websites and applications for setting up parental controls. Some of them do one or two things. Others are a full suite that allow parents to monitor several areas. Some of the most common things you can use parental control and filtering software for is content filtering, which is where you get to block the bad content from coming through their devices. Time limits, whether it's deciding the times of day they can use their devices or setting a limit on the length of time your kids can use the devices. This is a concern many of the apps allow you to control. Activity monitoring is the ability to see what are they using their devices for. How much time are they spending on YouTube or Instagram? How many messages or phone calls are they sending or receiving? Speaking of messages, there's message monitoring. This allows you to see who your children are messaging, and in some instances, you might be able to see the messages they're sending or receiving. Social media monitoring. These apps just track public information on their social media account. It reports to parents if there are any concerns or questionable posts made by the child. It may not always pick up private or posts with limited audiences, so there are some limitations there. App blocking allows a parent to decide what apps or categories of apps can be installed on a child's device. You can typically set it by category, such as social media, or by specific apps. So if you wanted to allow social media, but you wanted to block Snapchat or TikTok specifically, you could do that. Then location monitoring. This allows you to see where your child is or has been. This is a service specific to cell phones mostly. The device needs to be connected to the internet in order to be able to report the location. So having it on a Wi-Fi only iPad or tablet is only going to report the location when it's connected. And then last is invisibility. This just means that you can install the application on the phone without the child knowing. Many times the apps are going to be visible. They may create notifications for the child. However, there are some that run in the background and don't let the child be aware they're being monitored. Now, one of the things that I didn't plan to get into with this was the whole Apple versus Android discussion. We all like what we like, and that's just that. And so I wasn't going to go into it. I once was a tremendous fan of Apple devices. I joined the dark side a few years ago. Um, to be honest, it was the obstacles Apple presented for some of the parental controls. And that was the main reason that now I'm Team Android. Um, in discussing parental controls and some of those limitations with a good friend, he was pretty frank with me and told me I really needed to make it to talking point in this course. It was a deciding factor for my husband and I, for him and his family, and now for several additional friends that decided that Apple may not be what was in the best interest of our specific families, not in this particular area at least. So when I was looking at devices for my child, I discovered that Apple's stance on user privacy made it where parents can't monitor call logs or message contents. And that was a big concern for me when it came time to buy our oldest first phone. So because of that, we did choose a Samsung cell phone, and in setting that device up for him to use, I was sold on how intuitive it was and how easy it was to customize the phone and its settings, and some of the additional parental control options that I did have. So the following year, we traded in our iPhones for Samsung Galaxies. We do still have our iPads though. So I still have to put controls on those devices as well. However, I don't have a way to monitor iMessages the way that I can monitor messages sent on his phone. I also don't have the ability to hide apps if I felt it were necessary. It's not something I'm overly concerned about, but there may be some families that would need that. Um, but I'll go and I'll say, if you love a device and if you're loyal to it, by all means, get whatever matters most to you. But I do want you to be aware there are some limitations, and for us, this was a concern, that I wanted to be able to see what our kids might do or send, and that meant enough to us to make that switch. There are many different apps or software programs you can use to monitor your family and children's online activity. Chances are you've got options available to you you're not even aware of. There's Microsoft Family, Google Family, and Apple Family. Each of these will link a parent's account and kids' accounts, and they'll let you manage and share content, set time limits, track location, all of that. Starting with Microsoft Family, this is where I can control my oldest son's screen time on his Xbox and his computer. With it, I can monitor activity on each of his devices, whether it's a cell phone, Xbox, or the laptop. Every week I get an email and it tells me his activity for that week, what apps and games he's used and for how long, as well as any browsing or search history he may have had. I can also set time limits for how long he can be on those devices, either individually or combined. And then changes that I make are carried over to his Xbox and his computer automatically. So if he's at a friend's house playing games and he needs more screen time, he can send me a request that I can approve or reject, and it automatically updates his account. I can set filters for the content they view with their Microsoft accounts. This is great for gaming devices as well as their mobile devices. And then I can monitor spending. I can do this either by giving him a set limit of funds that he can spend, or I can require that all purchases are approved by a parent before they're processed. Microsoft Family can also be added to an Android device with a Microsoft launcher. I'm not aware of an iOS equivalent that's available at this time, though, so there is that limitation there too. Google Family allows you to view your child's activity. You can see what apps they're using, how long they're using them for. This is great for being able to see what's in front of your child the most. You can also manage their apps. You can set what's allowed, what's not allowed on their devices. You can deny or approve the apps that they want to download from Google Play Store, and then manage the in-app purchases that can become a problem. You can even hide specific apps on their devices too. You can find good content you can trust. Google Family has teacher recommended apps that support education and creativity, and so those are easy to locate too. You can set time limits, including bedtimes for your kids' devices, so this helps them maintain balance between screen time and real life, or if it's supper time, family time, or again, like earlier, if their behavior has become a problem, you can also lock their device. Google Family also lets you find your child's device or their location specifically. Um, if they're using an Apple device, this doesn't work. There's going to be restrictions there that won't let you use that. And then additionally, you can create events, shared software, documents, photos, all of that that you can share with your family. This family library lets you share apps and purchases between those accounts too. One drawback is that Google ends many of the parental support. Once your child turns 13, they get their own free kind of unlocked account. So at that point, you're going to have to find alternative ways to set those limits if you don't already have them in place. Now, remember how I said that I set up my kids' devices to only use Google Chrome for the web browser? Google Activity Monitoring is why. When I go into their accounts, I go into their data and personalization page. This link's on your handouts. From there, I can turn on or off the activity controls for each of the categories shown. There is web and app activity, location history, device information, voice and audio activity. This is optional. All of them are optional. YouTube and search history, YouTube watch history too. While this may not be something I feel like I really need to check in regularly on, it does give me the ability to just check in and see the usage, make sure the content they're watching is appropriate. When I do want to check in on them, I just go to their activity and timeline. The link's also on your handouts. If they've reached the age of 13, you will have to be logged into their account to view this activity, but our family has a policy. We know their passwords, so this isn't an issue for us. This next one with Google, of all things not to be on my radar, this one upset me the most that I had missed it. Even with DNS filters, I know that search results will still show up. They may not be able to click on them or view the web page, but the text clips will still show up. And even worse, if you click on the images to view the image results, you get an eyeful of thumbnail-sized filth. So because we could view our kids' search history and through Google and Microsoft family emails, we were able to find out, even if it was after the fact, if they had searched for anything and had those conversations if necessary. That was the best option I found at the time. It still didn't sit well with me, but I was still, not sure what I wanted to do. Recently, after sitting in on the devices portion of this class, a coworker added Google Wi-Fi system to her home to help with some of the dead spots they were having. And it came in 2 days after she got home from the hospital from an emergency appendectomy. So I called her, offered to swing by and set it up for her. We got it plugged in, connected, started connecting the kids' devices to it. As I group their devices, which this allows you to do, they've got 3 kids, all teens, 2 boys. So we're setting it up and I'm grouping their devices by individual. There was an option that appeared that said turn on Google Safe Search for those users. And that was the first I'd heard of it. So I switched it on and looked it up to see exactly what it was. It said Google Safe Search is a setting you can put on your computers, Android, iPhone, iPad devices. It filters sexually explicit content across images, videos, and websites. So I was like, okay, never hurts to have another layer of protection. So we finished setting up and connecting all those devices. I went into the DNS settings to set up OpenDNS before we went to turn the devices back over to the kids. As I did this, my friend was asking exactly what the kids would see if they searched for porn. And I told her that at our house with the OpenDNS filters, they could search it and they could see the results. But if they clicked on it, the link would take them to a page showing it had been blocked. So she picks up her phone and just typed in the word porn. However, instead of seeing the typical results, her feed was filtered through the Google Safe Search, and it now showed stuff like Bible devotions for overcoming porn in 40 days, or finding resources for recovering from porn addiction. Those images that I wouldn't have dreamed of showing you before, they're now all perfectly decent pictures. They're tied to articles, studies, posts pertaining to news about porn. Typically individuals who either struggled with porn addiction or who faced legal action due to porn-related crimes. But there's a link for instructions on setting up Google Safe Search. Those are also in your handouts. There's a link for how to keep Safe Search turned on devices and networks that you manage. So I would definitely check that out and enable it if you can. Lastly, in this section is Apple Family. Consumer pressure finally brought Apple to the parental control scene in 2018. It's when they launched Families. This allows you to set time limits or take time away. You can track how much time they spend in apps. With the time limits, you can limit specific apps, or you can allow more time for educational or messaging apps than you do for games or web browsing. So there's a lot of flexibility there that's really nice. Filters can allow a parent to choose the apps their kids can use. You can set web filters, you can restrict content shown, and you can filter podcasts, movies, music, other media available, anything through the iTunes and the App Store. And while Apple won't allow other apps to track locations, they do allow families to map family members' locations or to find lost devices. So you do have that ability through Apple Family. And then family sharing, not to be confused with families, is another feature. This means once you purchase an app or music or other content through iTunes, it will be shared and available to the other members of your family group, as long as it is allowed under the filters for each individual. So if you've got something rated T for teen, it may not be available to your preschooler. So, but it is nice that you can just buy it and share it for everybody there. When we get to looking at actual apps and software that can be installed on devices, there are a lot. There's a short chart in your handouts. This is just quick reference on some of the options out there. Nowhere near as many options as there are. There are a lot of options. What you decide to use is going to depend heavily on what you're hoping to monitor or control, as well as what devices you're planning to use it on. So just to point out a few on this list, Bark. This is what was recommended to me as an option by a good friend. He's over the computer and technology department at a larger area school, and it's one of the applications they use in their district. Another app that our family uses is Life360. It gives us an easier way to keep track of our oldest kiddo now that his calendar and schedule rival that of a world leader and celebrity superstar. So with Life360, we can set up a private circle that we share with. This means the only way you're going to see our location is if we send you an invite to see them. Once you're part of the family circle, you can see each other's locations. I know this sounds crazy, but over and over I've heard how Life360 has given peace of mind to parents, has saved children's, seniors, spouses in scary situations. This past summer, there was a postal carrier in my parents' community. She was run off the road in a hit-and-run accident. Her vehicle exited the roadway and went into a creek where it was almost completely submerged in water. And this lady had the presence of mind to keep her phone out of the water. She called her husband, put it on speaker, and told him, track my phone with Life360. Because of this app, her husband, who also is a police officer, he was able to locate her and get help to her. And they were able to extract her from her vehicle, and her life was spared thanks to this app and thanks to her quick thinking too. So this is also a good idea if you've got elderly parents or friends, relatives that you worry about. If they wander off, you would have a way to help authorities locate them too. Smart notifications is one of my favorite features of this app. Kids always forget to text, so I can set up smart notifications that text me for them. The free version of the app lets you get notifications for 2 locations. That works for us. With the paid version, you can get more, but what this means is anytime my kiddo arrives at school or leaves school, anytime he arrives at home or leaves home, I get a notification. I also get notifications for, I can switch it if they're going to be somewhere else. I can get notifications if he leaves Nana and Papa's. I can turn school off, turn it on for Nana and Papa's. So that's nice to know when he's out and about. It means no guessing for me as to when the band bus arrives back to school after a long trip for a away game. I can see their progress as they travel home, so I can kind of time when I get to school. That gives mom a peace of mind. Some of the paid features you can also get with Life 360 is crash detection, driving reports, and roadside assistance. We're not yet driving. When we are going to be upgrading our package. You can find out more. You can go to life360.com. And then jumping back to that software chart, Casper Sky Kids is another software. It's listed there in the handout. Our family's used this the past year. It does allow me to monitor many of the areas that concern me, but it also leaves me without the ability to check on activity and messages. So because of that, I also use a site called If This Then That, shortened IFTTT. It's not intended for parental controls, but it makes an excellent tool for it. If this, then that is common lingo that programmers use and computer geeks in general when you're coding something. If this condition is met, then this action is executed, such as if I change my Facebook profile picture, then change my Instagram profile picture to match. Or if a text message is sent or received from a child's device, then a copy of that message is saved into a document in mom's Dropbox account. Because it's not intended for this kind of control, there are a lot of other connections that can be made. Smart home automation, social media, learning, general geekiness. I love this one. If the International Space Station flies overhead, I get a text message that lets me know. I primarily use this just to fill in that gap of monitoring text messages or pictures taken with the devices. I may or may not check these, but I have them in case I need them and in case I need to go back and look at conversation history. I was even recently able to put it to good use. I had a parent contact me to find out if our oldest knew something about an incident that had happened on school property with her child. And I was not only able to ask my kid about it, but I was also able to go through message logs and see conversation history between the two kids that collaborated her child's version of the event. So she was able to take that to school and provide support for her kid in what he said had happened. As with each section of this course, I would just point out, just like our children, these services and the technology, they're continually changing, they're continually adapting. There's always something new, whether it's a new way to protect your kids entirely, a new app with broader features, a new law that restricts old features. It takes time, but always do a little research. If you need to keep it in a tight budget, there are free options for almost any of this. It'll allow you to do a lot, but you may have to spend more if you want one app that does what multiple free apps may do. It's just really about finding what works best for you and your family, and making sure as your family changes, those solutions are going to change along with you. There may be points that what worked for you before no longer works. That's where community is vital. We're not alone. There are other parents that are dealing with this. They have the same issues we have. Other parents have the same concerns we have. Reach out, because we really do this best when we do it together. So don't ever hesitate to reach out to me, to other parents, to your church members too, your pastors. So that's pretty much it for this class. I do want to thank you for joining me. I hope you've been able to get something out of it. I hope that you've now got a little more knowledge, maybe a few more options for protecting your family. If you do have questions, if you've got information to share, I do love that. I love when parents are like, oh, I've used this. This is great. This is what I love about it. I would love to connect with you. So, also, if you're a little more technologically advanced, if you're not afraid of getting further into devices settings, there are some additional things you can do. You can disable private browsing, the incognito mode in Chrome. So, if you want to go a little further with it, my contact information is on the handouts for the session. And then also don't forget the Home Builders Ministry. We have these retreats 3 times a year. We're going to be in Branson in October, the 23rd through the 25th. We'll be in Dallas, February, I'm looking at my dates here, February 4th through 7th. And then the Gulf Coast, which is the one we're missing right now. We will be back at the Gulf Coast April 29th through May 1st of next year. That's one of my favorite retreats. It's beautiful. So I hope you will make time to get away and enjoy a weekend with your spouse. You can fellowship with other couples. You can get valuable knowledge for building your family on biblical principles, which is what the Home Builders Ministry supports and advocates. So to find out more about those, the ministry itself or those retreats, just go to www.homebuildersministry.org.